For too long have I heard throughout the Fire Emblem community that units like the Laguz are just useless and you should never use them because they are not really useful or have any advantages at all. I think this is actually the symptom of a bigger problem, which I like to call the Laguz problem. Today in this video I'm going to show you why the Laguz are actually very good in both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, and how people have been using them wrong and investing resources into other things that they think are better but are actually pretty much the same for less. I'll start off with Path of Radiance. I will say that in this game, the Laguz are in unarguably a worse position than that in Radiant Dawn. Part of this has to do with the meter itself and because of the lack of availability of items such as Olivey Grass. The Laguz in this game, I really want you to try to focus on them as if they were pre-promos. Leith and Mordecai come at a part of the game in which their stats are relatively higher than almost everybody else in your army, which in comparison allows you to focus XP into small individual units such as Oscar, Ike, or your mage of choice, and use the Laguz to help carry the harder parts of combat throughout the game. Leith and Mordecai do eventually start falling off, but their purpose during this portion of the game is to basically just give you that buff, give you that extra oomph in terms of unit quality so that you can deal with a lot of enemies. For example, Mordecai can easily hold the back gate in the sneak chapter all by himself or with very little assistance and allow your other units to push up and be able to deal with the enemies from the front part. But I do think that Leith is better than Mordecai personally just because of her gauge appearing on turn 1, allowing her to transform immediately and being able to contribute on those first few turns, which is more important than being able to contribute later on. There is a remedy to this, which is the Laguz Stone. They're not very prevalent, but you should use them freely. I'm not really a big fan of hoarding them. There are only a couple of chapters which I recommend saving 1 or 2, and it's actually for racing, and it's later down the game anyway. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the Laguz in Path of Radiance have comparable stats to other units that you get at those points in time, but without any of the investment. What does this mean? I like to treat the Laguz in this game as transitional units. Whenever my army is lacking for somebody that isn't one of the main core casts that I'm trying to train up, instead of bringing along a Zihark or a Boyd or somebody that I don't really think is going to contribute that much, I bring a Laguz because one of the two things is going to happen. I'm either going to have a unit that has a lot of movement like the Cats or the Tiger that also can do significant damage, or I'm going to have a flyer in Janaf and Olki being able to push up. Muarim is actually a little bit different, so is Ranulf. They actually have comparable stats. They can scale up pretty well, even into endgame if you desire to do so. And they have access to skills like any other unit, so there really is nothing wrong with giving them these skills and trying to use them long term. The other ones though, I do feel they are better as transitional units. People complain a lot about the Laguz gauge. It's not really that much of an issue, especially since you have the immediate transformation ones, which means you can do most of the map clearing before the gauge even runs out. And when it does, you can either Laguz Stone right back up, or just let them take a couple of hits on enemy face since their stats aren't as reduced. It's not that bad, it's not that difficult to manage. I don't really feel like the Path of Radiance Laguz are in a bad spot. I feel like they don't scale well, this I do agree with, because other units have more potential scaling in terms of their stats and in terms of what they can do in 1-2 range. But they are definitely very useful as transitional units, allowing you to be able to fill gaps within your squad and have competent combat units for certain parts of the game. Now I want to move on to Radiant Dawn, where it really irks me and makes the biggest difference of them all. I'm going to start with the classic case of people misinterpreting a unit's ability. I'm going to go with Mordecai. A lot of people for some reason think Mordecai just sucks in Radiant Dawn, and this couldn't be farther from the truth. Yeah, Mordecai does suck if you toss him into a bunch of mages. Mordecai has, at base, a colossal 32 defense. I'm not making this up. You can look up his stats at base. He has 32 defense and 28 strength with the 10 might weapon because his fang counts as 10 might. To put this into perspective, Braum, in order for Braum to compete with Mordecai, he needs to go to 2020 and become a marshal in order to reach the same or equivalent stats as Mordecai at base. But you're going to be like, Axum, if I have to manage the Tiger gauge, I'm not going to be able to attack on player phase. Well, here's the interesting part. In order for you to match the damage output of just hitting Olivey Grass on enemy phase with the Tiger, you would have to attack on player phase 7 to 8 times with Braum at base. I want you to think about how ridiculous that is. it means that it is more efficient for me to park Mordecai in a choke point and keep hitting Olive Grass to just recharge his gauge than it is for me to actually attack with another unit. This is all due to the fact that he has massive strength at base. So why is it that people continuously prefer to bring characters like Braum or other of these? Well, the argument could be in favor of the fact that they don't scale well into the tower. And this is true. Mordecai really is not going to be getting any speed at any point in time, and he's not going to really be wrecking stuff inside the tower. But here's the thing. Don't we all know that the end game gives you a bunch of Laguz Royals that can trivialize that anyway? Why are we pretending that Radiant Dawn isn't one big escort mission in which you're taking a squad of Teletubbies all the way to the tower to then wipe it out? Because that's really what it is. You have all these characters given to you at different points in time so that you can take advantage of those different maps and be able to clear them, so then you can assemble the Avenger squad to take down the tower. And by that point, you'll have more than enough tools and more than enough characters that you brought up along the way that really are going to be able to tackle the tower. So in a way, bringing somebody like Mordecai, who isn't going to draw any resources from anywhere else, allows you to sink resources into other characters. Wow, look at that. Did you know that in order for Mia to match base Ranulph, she would need to be basically promoted Trueblade? And the unironic part of that is that if you just gave 4 levels to Ranulph, he would have access to Rend and just be able to basically trivialize the damage output that Mia could. Now, you may say, but Axum, Mia has more availability. Particularly the first 2, she can't even get access to forges, meaning that she can't even go to the full potential that she's allowed, that people usually say anyway. And if you take the comparative cost of forging a steel sword versus how many olive grasses you can buy, I ain't gonna lie, but the olive grasses are a lot cheaper than whatever the steel forge is gonna be worth. But if you don't believe me, let me just put this into perspective. At level 26, which is Ranulph's base starting level, he has a colossal 15 more HP than a 20 Mia. Not only that, he also has 5 more points of strength, comparatively more speed, more skill, more luck, more defense, and more resistance. So Ranulph beats a 20 Mia in every single stat at base. Every single one of them. Every single one. There is not a single stat that Mia has that beats Ranulph at base. And I want you to think about that for a second. What does that mean? It means that Ranulph is actually pretty goddamn solid if you think that Mia is good. Not only that, Ranulph is force deployed in about 6 or 7 chapters in part 3. How are people instinctively ignoring this information? It's something that I never quite understood. Ranulph is actually pretty solid in terms of stats. He does have to deal with the cat gauge, and that is the one thing that I would fault him for. The cat gauge drains at a much faster and higher rate than any other of the gauges, meaning that more likely than not, you will have to be hitting Olive Grass on the player face turn with Ranulph in order to keep his stats comparatively on par and to maintain his transformation gauge during the entire time. But this isn't a problem. I've already made it very clear that Olive Grasses are abundant and everywhere in the game. Literally, you can buy them all the time in almost every other chapter of the game. They instinctively give you these items. But if that wasn't enough for you, just look at Janeth and Ulki. Janeth and Ulki have absolutely bonkers stats. They're basically mini Tibarns with super Canto and an insane spread. Like, they are so powerful. They're really close to Terra as well. It's such a good unit to have. To me, the Laguz and Radiant Dawn, especially the ones you start getting towards part 3 and the end of the game, are infinitely better than a lot of the infantry units that you'd have to train up. Mostly because of the fact that they don't require experience. They just don't. They just have the stats. And just having the stats and requiring 1,500 gold or whatever amount of gold it is in order to buy an Olive Grass is way better than whatever experience dump I have to toss into in order to make and justify one of the weaker infantry units. It just doesn't make sense to me. Especially since these units will eventually fall off and you're only bringing a specific amount to the tower. The Laguz are actually fantastic in terms of cost efficiency. They cost very little for what they can bring to the table. Their weapons don't really degrade because they're their fangs and their claws and their talons. so they don't cost any weapon values at all. The only cost you really have is an olivey grass, and all of the olivey grasses are usually cheaper than the weapons anyway. So it's almost like a no-brainer to me that in terms of cost efficiency, the Laguz are actually the cheapest, most effective way to be clearing hordes of enemies or even enemies in general. So conclusion. What do I really think about the Laguz? They're cheap and they have good enough stats to perform specific jobs throughout the majority of the game. They don't really cost any weapon usages because of the way they work in Path of Radiance and in Radiant Dawn, and they're able to contribute at any point in time by just yeeting them in. Do they scale well into endgame? Perhaps not, but that's okay. But in the case of Radiant Dawn, you'll get a squad of killer guys that will just destroy everything anyway. So really, you just want to choose the most strong and effective people that can carry you throughout different portions of the game. I believe that the Laguz get a very, very bad rep from people that say they have to deal with the Laguz gauge and instead dump a horde of resources and energy drops and stat boosters and all of this stuff into other units that would need way more in order to compare against the most base of Laguz. Guys, trust me, they are strong. They do a lot of work in the game. They are absolutely fantastic. I think that you should be giving them more tries and seeing how far you can push their potential, how far you can maximize them, instead of just going ahead and discarding them right off the bat. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys think about the Laguz problem, and if you feel that this is true and that people underrate Laguz by a lot. If they do, or if they don't, let me know. I'd love to see. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.